center has had consultations with various states, and in fact, the directives have also been given to the states and union territories to now try and facilitate the interstate movement for stranded pilgrims, tourists, to most importantly, migrant laborers. Now, how is the economic situation really sort of playing out at this point in time, and especially in terms of the post-COVID scenario, because COVID-19 is here to stay for the next many months to come? How is the economic recovery going to happen? What's really happening on the United States and the India front? To talk about all of these issues, I'm joined here by somebody who has a very sharp view of things playing out both in New Delhi as well as, of course, in Washington, D.C. Dr. Mukesh Aghi of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum is joining me now. Thank you so much, Dr. Aghi, for joining us in this conversation.
My pleasure.
I hope you and the family have been doing safe, and because the situation there, of course, has been extremely worrisome.
We're doing well. Thank you for asking.
Right. To begin with you, if you could give me a sense of what really is your big worry at this point in time now. The economic downturn, the economic recession is something that several countries, including India, were actually looking at even before the pandemic happened. Over the past few months, the last year itself, we saw that downturn coming across. What is your biggest worry at this point in time, Dr. Ali?
Well, I think when you go through this crisis, you're trying to focus on lives and also livelihood. And you have to find that balance. And I think India has done a stellar job trying to have the lockdown, which has been very efficient, very effective. It shows in number of lives lost, which is every life is important, but the numbers are not that high compared to 1.3 billion people we have in the country itself. But I think more important is that now it's time to start looking at how do you start getting the livelihood going. Our experience in the US is that the last quarter, the economy collapsed, contracted by 4.8% itself. While the stimulus package has been in trillions of dollars, when we look at the stimulus package in India, it is much, much lower number itself. So I think while it's calibrated, while it's focused on trying to slowly ease the economy, I think it's going to be critical that a stimulus package is announced which builds the confidence of the citizens, builds the confidence of the business community, but more important, focus on MSMEs and small retail shopkeepers, because I think if they start shutting down, that it'll be hard to revive the economy in the next 6 to 12 months.
Right. But in terms of the current lockdown situation, and we've seen the criticism come in for President Trump in the United States. We've looked at the number of, in fact, fatalities, the number of positive cases. They've been huge. US, in fact, even took over Italy to the epicenter of China. And if you compare it to the situation in India, the way Prime Minister Narendra Modi went in for the sudden announcement of lockdown, which led to a huge problem as far as the domestic economy, the unorganized sector was concerned, but it did seem like it could achieve something what we have been calling as flattening the curve for a while now. How do you really look at these lockdown situations, and do you think, what had to be achieved has been achieved of it now, and it really needs to be eased out at this point in time?
Well, as I said earlier, I think the Prime Minister did a stellar job. The bureaucracy stepped up. And more important, citizens heard the clarion call and they got together and focused on the lockdown. I think it has been very effective. It has shown positive results. But now the easing has to start coming up, because I think you can't continue locking down the citizens and the economy and people's livelihood, because India's economy, 60% is consumption based. And if you stop that consumption, then the economy completely slows down. So I think you have to slowly start easing up from that perspective. As far as the US goes, I think we did a poor job as far as lockdown is concerned. We could have done a much, much better job. In fact, today, the numbers have crossed 58,000 deaths in the US, and touching almost 1 million positive cases. And so US has had more deaths now due to this coronavirus than Vietnam War also. So I think, if you want a great card US will get a F grade card from a lockdown perspective as compared to India, which has done a very, very good job. Now the question is how do you revive the economy? And that's a balancing act. When I say balancing act, that means you want to make sure that people are able to move and still not infecting the remaining population, because the density in India is much, much higher compared to the US. And I think what we are seeing, the gradual announcement of moving interstate of people, trying to get more and more goods into essential category itself is a positive sign. And we believe that in the next 2 to 4 weeks, you will see India opening up substantially itself.
And I think that's where the challenges, in fact, lie, and the litmus test will, in a way, also begin, because while the lockdown has been appreciated, but there has been a lot of worry, apprehension about how perhaps our testing numbers have been pretty low. And it's only when the lockdown is lifted up in phases that the real challenges of social distancing and sanitation, given the density that you spoke about, all of that will come into play. But moving forward now, Dr. Agi, I mean, the big elephant in the room, China. And there cannot be a discussion at this point in time without talking about the Chinese firms. What is the conversation like in the boardrooms, which people now think will actually hold China accountable instead of maybe multilateral international organizations?
Well, you have to understand, I think you will see a sense of people saying there has to be accountability. You have hundreds of thousands of people which are dead, economies which are impacted by trillions of dollars. Somebody has to be held accountable. And you saw a state of Missouri suing Communist Party of China. The Bild newspaper in Germany sending an invoice of 150 billion pounds to China. So I think that is going to start showing up, and you will see the world uniting and trying to hold China accountable. So that trend and process will continue itself. But more important is the global supply chain will realign itself, where companies are saying, hey, listen, we cannot be dependent all of our manufacturing, our critical items in China. We have to look at alternative. Those alternatives are bring some back to the US, but look at friendly nations such as India and see if you can move it there. India also has to look at its own global supply chain. 90% of APIs come from China. That has to be brought back to India itself. So I think you will see the conversation in the boardroom and in the business community is what are the alternatives? And I think it's a fantastic moment for India to step up and provide that alternative to these companies itself to bring in more FDI and more job creation into India.
But what are the big obstacles at this point in time for this India story to really take off? Because we're still looking at the alternate options of a Vietnam, of a Philippines, or even Bangladesh. When companies actually think of going beyond China, looking at a China +1, China +2 expansion model, what really are the kind of criteria where India will have to get its act together right now?
Well, I think India has to be transparent in its policy making. It has to be predictable in its policy making. It has to provide not only just access to the market, but also level playing field. What happened when Walmart came in and bought Flipkart, and 2 weeks later, he changed the policy. What happened in the state of Andhra Pradesh, where the government changed and they completely reversed all the contract sanctity has to be there. So it is important. There has to be a sense of predictability and transparency. While, yes, they are, India has taken a great job of trying to bring the corporate tax down, manufacturing coming in, their rates down from a tax perspective. But then you have to look at the labor reforms, you have to look at land reforms. If you're going to compete with Vietnam and Cambodia and other geographies, it is important that we relook at all of this and make sure that there's a sense of predictability as you move forward itself.
Would you like to do some number crunching for us in terms of, we are looking at the revised GDP rates, we are looking at the unemployment numbers, both for US or in India. How worrisome are they looking at this point in time? And if you could explain it a bit from a layman's perspective, with the disclaimer that I am myself not an economic expert here.
Well, I think you have to understand these numbers are shifting on a daily basis, and I would say on an hourly basis. So it's hard to do a forecast, but let me give you some numbers for the US. last 2 weeks, the unemployment filing has shot up to 26 million people. And we expect that number to go up dramatically, which means that the current economic unemployment has shot up almost over 10%. And you have to understand, US was humming at zero unemployment only 3 weeks ago itself. So I think from that perspective, that is a big, big concern itself. Economy contracting by 4.8% in the US last quarter. That is a big, big challenge. More important is the confidence of the businesses, confidence of the consumer has been shattered. Businesses are under lockdown. They're unable to operate, unable to basically move their goods to the stores itself because stores are shut down. So I think all of this will take tremendous amount of effort to revive. I don't think you will see 2021 as a year of complete revival. This will go on till 2022 or possibly beyond that. So when you look at India, which was already struggling to get the economy going beyond 4.5%, the lockdown has had a dramatic impact. And I think you will need a massive stimulus package, both from the government, but more important, bringing FDI into the country, which can invest and create jobs, is going to be very, very critical. So it's a balancing act, making sure that you're able to stimulate the economy. At the same time, at least minimally, I believe you got to bring $100 billion of investment on an annual basis next 10 years to keep the economy moving forward.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying here because, I've also been personally going out there speaking to the migrants, the laborers, and while we are talking about the organized sector, we have to keep in mind the huge unorganized sector in India, whose back seems to be even broken off in a worse sort of a manner what they faced during the demonetization in 2016. Compared to that, they seem to be in a worse of plight right now. So it's not going to be easy. You say that recovery will be way beyond 2021. The subprime crisis, the world took at least 3 years to come back on track with the economy. So what kind of job losses are we looking at, and especially in terms of the Indians in America today, the H-1B visa card holders, their concerns, how serious do you think is the situation for them today?
So I think H-1B issue is critical. And because what happens is if they lose their job, they have 60 days to find a new job. Otherwise, they have to leave the country. And today the number is almost 250,000 of those H-1B holders. And I think the process for them to find jobs is becoming challenging. But more important is you have another 800,000 Indians who are waiting for the green card to come in. That has also been stopped at least by 60 days by the president's executive order itself. So that's also challenging. So I think the impact of this and also what's happening in Middle East is going to have an impact on remittance to India, because roughly India gets 60 to 70 billion dollars of remittance on an annual basis into India, which does help on the foreign exchange. And by the way, the foreign exchange numbers at the moment are not impacted. India reserves are at $450 billion, and they're going up. And one of the main reasons beside is the price of oil. Yes. And so I think that is, to me, is not a cause of concern. But I think if you have this remittance slowing down and you start bringing these workers back from Middle East and also H-1B, that will have an impact on the remittance to India itself.
Other than the remittance, also in terms of, you mentioned the oil prices, and we just saw the kind of crash that happened, with actually a negative trade, futures trade happening for oil. What kind of a shadow has that cast, and specifically, which are the sectors that you're the most sort of concerned for at the moment?
Well, I think the lower prices is a blessing for India, because for every dollar barrel price goes up, it has an impact of $1 billion India's foreign exchange. And India is one of the world's largest importer of oil itself. So at this price, I think it's a blessing, which does help hopefully to revive the economy. But you have to understand, a large number, US has become a net exporter of oil. And that's because it became very efficient on the shale production. And it brought the break-even price in the last 2 years from $65 to low $30. And if the oil price go below 30, then those shale production companies start shutting down. And in order to revive that, it takes much more energy. That's why the future went into negative, because it's better to keep on producing. But now you look at, there's no storage capacity. All tankers are full and they're parked on international water, finding a destination itself. So from an average consumer perspective, it's a blessing. But to mid to long term, it is going to be a challenge if they start shutting down and reviving the oil market also.
Okay. Two final questions then, Dr. Agi. One, on the India-US bilateral front itself. I mean, we saw what played out as far as the supply of hydroxychloroquine was concerned. First, there were a lot of noises that were actually made from President Trump. Then, of course, those tones were a little mellowed down. India supplying. We still do not know about the efficiency of these anti-malarial drugs in terms of fighting COVID-19. But where does the relationship stand at this point in time, given it's an election year? If there are large uncertainties happening, and there is also that the parallel story of the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom playing out, which has categorized India after 2004 in a certain negative category, and which has not been well taken by New Delhi here.
Well, I think the relationship between the two countries couldn't be better. I think India's effort to open its pharma industry to export has sent a very strong message, both to the administration and to the citizen, that here's a country in time of challenges is willing to step up and support the requirement of the country, regardless of the efficacy of the medicine itself. So that sent a very strong message. More important is while the administration is Republican, the relationship on the Democratic side is also very, very strong. So I think it's a bipartisan support India has. And with what's happening with China and what we foresee what's going to happen with China, India becomes much more critical ally for the US also in trying to manage Indo-Pacific region itself. So I think from a geopolitical perspective, from a market perspective, and from an overall relationship perspective, the relationship is very strong. Yes, you have issues on religious freedom. Yes, you have issues on human rights. These statements keep on coming. But I think you have to look at it from a bigger perspective. I'm not saying ignore the issue of religious freedom. Those are important because the strength of India's democracy is diversity and openness for every religion to practice itself. And I think to me that strength continues. Yes, you will have fingers pointed. We just need to look at more carefully how to manage that. But overall, the relationship is one of the best I've seen in the last 10 years.
But the way the communal polarization has been playing out in India, over the past many months now, it started off even before the CAA debates with 370. You saw CAA happening, Ayodhya temple verdict coming in, the Delhi riots happening this year. Just in fact, even while President Trump actually was in New Delhi. And now these sharp communal polarizations, do they cast a shadow on the mind of investors who may actually be looking at India as an alternate to China going forward?
Well, I think the investors are looking, yes, they're concerned about what happens in the society. They're concerned about how the government treats its citizens. But at the same time, I think investors are also looking for a sense of open market which has the same value system, and a sense of transparency and level playing field for them to go invest. I think, if you look at India, has had communal rights since independence. Every time there are flare-ups itself, the question is has India constitutionally moved in a direction which marginalize other citizens? That has to be evaluated itself. I think there's a lot of politics also behind it. But at the same time, yes, the concern comes, you have to relook at it. I'm not saying ignore it itself, but I think overall, the Prime Minister Modi government has done a fantastic job trying to make sure that the economy picks up. The relationship on a global basis goes up. In fact, in the last 5 years, the stature of India on a global basis has gone up. Never before it was that high. So I think while there are concerns, there's no perfect government, But overall, I think businesses are seeing India as a potential destination for market access and investment very much.
Well, some would argue that the civil nuclear agreement was also a change, a sort of absolute changing turning point in relationships that also happened when another Republican president was in Washington D.C. But finally, then this is an election year in the U.S. itself, Dr. Ragi, and I know it's too early to crystal gaze anything. But if 2016 was all about Russia in that fight between a Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, is the 2020 presidential elections between a Joe Biden and Donald Trump going to be decided by, what they say, how things go with China as an important factor?
Well, I think it's too early to say. We still have 6 months. A lot can happen. But I think the two factors which are going to play very much. One is the economy and job creation. That's going to be critical. And then citizens here are going to see which administration can deal with China more effectively and efficiently. But I think more important is a sense of, a sense of whom can you trust is going to be critical in this election also. So I think you will see things will shift dramatically now till November 2nd itself. But I think the economy and China will play a very pivotal role in people's decision itself.
And of course, as they say, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip, and we don't even know how whether they'll have to be virtual electioneering campaigns with technical glitches or not so technical glitches. But it's just definitely going to be something which will encompass and which will include just challenges at so many different levels and uncertainties. The black swan event that has caused it, that the whole world is trying to, in fact, come to terms with at the moment. Appreciate you joining us, finding time to join us for this conversation, Dr. Mukesh Aghi.
Well, thank you very much, Smita. Please stay well. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you here in New Delhi. This is Smita Shah.